Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon, I assume for most of you. If you're somewhere in a different time zone, good morning. So my name is Doug Weimer, and we are going to spend the next hour going through Adult Ed Instructors, the underutilized data miners. And give me 1 second, I'll make sure I have my chat window up. So if there's any questions, I can follow through with those. Okay. So if you don't know me, I am an adult education program specialist with the Maryland Department of Labor. I have been an ESL teacher, middle school math teacher, and also in adult education administration at a community college as well. So first of all, are you in the right place? Well, you're here, so you're all in the right place. But just to give you a quick understanding of what we are going to be talking about, if you're a program administrator, staff, or program leadership, ask yourself, does your program struggle to make noticeable growth and measurable skill gains year over year? Do you feel disconnected from your instructors? And do you want more buy-in from your instructors on program improvement? If you can say yes to any of those, this might be a good session for you. For those of you that are instructors, you can ask yourself, do you wish you had more input on how to improve the quality of the program? Do you wish the quality of the instruction was not just based on the number of students who gain a level? And do you wish you had more impact on removing student barriers to success? If you could say yes to any of those, this also might be an appropriate session for you. So our objectives today, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by data mining. I want to talk about giving instructors yet one more hat to wear, and then a plan of attack, interventions, and goals when it comes to improving the outcomes of your program. So first of all, just think for a second, what do you think of when you think of the term data miner? Maybe you think of, the traditional miner, someone that's down in a coal mine or gold mine, bringing precious metals to the fore. Maybe you think about this kind of old school Renaissance idea of a miner. Maybe you think about something like, the canary in the coal mine. Or if you're me, maybe you think about Charles Miner, a character from the #1 show of all time, The Office, at least in my opinion. But when we're talking about data mining when it comes to adult education, Encyclopedia Britannica says that data mining is the process of discovering interesting and useful patterns and relationship in large volumes of data. And if it's one thing that we do have in adult education, it is data. Whether you have a small program or a large program, there is lots of data to be had. And so when we're talking about data mining, we're talking about how do you utilize that data to improve your program. So let's talk a little bit about the adult ed instructor. So what are all of the hats that an adult ed instructor wears? And feel free to put some in the chat. But what came to my mind is, first and foremost, our adult ed instructors are educators, right? They are the #1 person responsible for the education of our adult learners, whether it's English as a second language, preparation for GED, NEDP, etc. They're coaches. I often think of our adult instructors as coaches for our students. They're the person that are in our students' corners sometimes whenever they don't have anyone else in their corner. And I see someone said cheerleaders. Yes, that goes right along with that. Someone beat me to that. Social worker. Yeah, they're the person that is helping our learners to navigate all of those barriers in their life. It doesn't just have to be educational. They're the one that are connecting them with resources to pay the rent, to help with childcare, et cetera. And also over the past year or so, there also been tech support, right? Unless you're in a situation where it's 100% in-person instruction, they've also been tech support for our students that are accessing their classes on laptops, on Chromebooks, on old computers, on smartphones, iOS, Android, et cetera. So I'm arguing that we could add one more hat to our adult ed instructors and ask them to also be data miners. So what's going to happen if we take our adult instructor with this bag full of responsibilities they have and we say, you know what, I think you also need to be a miner? What's going to happen? Well, they might have a few choice words if you tell them that they have another job to do, possibly. But you know what? Our adult ed instructors are going to do what they've always done. They're going to pick up the tools that we give them, they're going to put the hat on, and they're going to move on because they know that they realize how important they are to the lives of their students. They still might have a few choice words to say, though. Will we have an instructor revolt? I don't think so. Whenever I implemented this in a program that I was a part of, I thought that maybe we would have an instructor revolt, but it turns out that actually wasn't the case. Why not? Well, why do adult instructors join this field anyway? Well, could be because of the money. Okay, that's too much money. There we go. Could be because of the money. But mostly it's because they want to help people. They want to help adults and they want to see them succeed. They want to see them reach for the stars, get that high school diploma, improve their English proficiency, transition to a better paying job for themselves, for their lives, etc. But we're going to ask them to do more. There are certain things you have to keep in mind that are non-negotiables for our instructors. First of all, you have to be honest with the instructors, okay? Don't hide anything. All right, now this may seem like a given, but you know, program administrators often spend a lot of time shielding people from bad news. You have to be honest with your instructors, you know, honest with what you're trying to do, honest with the state of the program. You want to have empathy for your instructors. You know, by and large, adult education instructors are part-time adjunct instructors. And the amount that they get paid for their time in the classroom does not really cover what they do on the whole. In addition, you have to follow through with instructors as well. One of the best ways to lose the faith of your instructors is to put a lot of time and effort into a new initiative and then have it fall through because you didn't have the follow through that you needed. So in order to have better outcomes, we have to provide them with better tools that will provide better instruction, and it will come back around to having these better outcomes. So, Doug, you win. Okay, what do we do now? You've got me convinced we can make our instructors be adult ed data miners. So what do we do? So let's go down the line. Let's talk about the big picture of data mining in adult education, having the honest discussion of challenges, how to measure it, what interventions are needed, and the follow through and goals that you have. So first of all, the big picture. You have to lay out the big picture for your instructors. Be brave. You know, where is our program and where do we need to be? This is a difficult time to do that because our data right now really is an outlier because we've had so much difficulty this year with getting students the assessments and then the post-testing that they need in order to be successful and to report out on what's going on. But whether you use a current year's data or you use trend data over time, you want to make sure that you are using the NRS data as much as possible. Use the table 4 data. Simplify the data. Don't hide it though. And balance the promise of the data versus, you know, a penalty. So when you present this data to the instructors, don't just say, look, we're not doing well and they're going to shut our program down. That's not appropriate, right? Make sure that you balance the penalty, in this case, what could happen, the negative, with what you're going to do about it and what you want from the instructors in order to improve things. Now, having an honest discussion of the challenges. One place to start is to give the instructors the open forum to discuss what they see as challenges or barriers to student completion and advancement. Don't place conditions on this discussion either. Allow the instructors to identify all the challenges, regardless of the reason or the ability to affect the change. And respect the instructor's comfort level. You know, some instructors like having this discussion one-on-one during, say, an evaluation time, and some instructors really want this to be a group professional development type atmosphere. So let's pause for a second from my presentation and let's think about, okay, you have an open forum for your instructors, whether it's, say, a semi-annual training event, maybe it's an open survey if that works better, or maybe it's something systematic you do at, say, a recontracting time. Think about if you were to present the data on your program to instructors and they see, you know, yeah, things really aren't doing as well as they hope, or maybe the instructor's individual data is maybe not what they want it to be. What kind of reasons do you think instructors would provide you for why the data doesn't match up with what the goals of the program are? So if you could just take a minute or two and in the chat, put in there what you think if you gave this opportunity for the instructors to voice their opinions on why the program or why they're not doing as well as maybe what you would want them to do, what would be the reasons that instructors would give? Okay, so I see family issues. I'm assuming that you're meaning student family issues, but it could be personal. Students not attending class, students leaving too early, okay? Spotty attendance of the students, not good marketing of the program. That's a good point. Students have too much on their plates. They're adult learners, of course they do. Inconsistent attendance. Technology issues, yes, that's a huge one right now is technology issues. Students' work, life, kids, illness, transportation, etc. All those classic barriers to success that our students face day in and day out. Lower level learners stop out too often. The TABE test is too difficult, okay? Attendance, not enough communication about the program needs. That's an interesting one. And placement, I assume you mean where the student's placed in the program may not be appropriate. Costless goals test questions are not good indicators of progress. Students get a new job. Students have financial issues, of course. You know, I always consider, you know, a student registering for an adult education class somewhat akin to joining a health club or joining a gym, which is unfair because of course our students, it's not saying that they're not dedicated to it, but you know, you go into these things with the best of intentions, like, you know, you're going to go back to the gym every day. It's going to be great. And then one thing comes up, in this case for our students, maybe their job schedule changes and then that's it. They never go back again. So there's lots of things that come up that prevent our students from attending class, right? Student gets a new job. Lesson objectives are not aligned with assessment levels. Okay, these are all great ideas. Some of the things that I would argue might come up is kind of in line with a lot of what you said. A lot of my students drop out of class because the class meets too early. The chairs in my classroom are too small. You want improved outcomes? I don't see how our curriculum lines up with the costless or TABE tests. Someone alluded to that, right? The levels of my students are all over the place. Okay, maybe they don't feel that they're properly leveled. The textbook is terrible. That could be textbook / curriculum / online learning platform, etc. I don't have enough time to prepare original lessons, okay? My adult learners have no one to watch their children during class. Yes, these are all very realistic and feasible reasons why there would be challenges and why an instructor could say, hey, I'm doing my best, but these are the things I'm facing. This is why we're not reaching our goals. Don't panic, okay? This is good info. You know, instructors sometimes may not feel like they get the opportunity to voice this information, especially if it's a situation where there may be levels of administration between the instructor and, say, the program director. You know, in a large program, you know, sometimes it's really good for the program director to get this one-on-one feedback from the instructors, especially if it's done in a very open and empathetic atmosphere. You know, I always worried about this becoming like a shouting match. But, you know, for the most part, our instructors really want the students to succeed, and they also want to feel like they're good instructors. But when they're presented with data that says, hey, you know what? Only 1 out of every 10 students in your class, when they get the post-test, actually improve a level, they may take that back and say, well, I'm a terrible instructor. And so this is a good way for them to have those open and honest communications with you to talk this through so that they can not just feel like they're being told you are not doing well enough, but to actually feel like they're part of the solution and that they have information to give that may be useful that they hadn't thought about. So what is your role? Okay, if you're a leadership in a program, what is your role? Well, your role is to focus and filter that discussion. So you're getting all this information from the instructors. You've got to filter it down and figure out, okay, what can we do with this, right? Because some of this feedback is truly instructional in nature. There are some things that really are the instructor's responsibility. It doesn't mean that there's no role for the program leadership. It could be something that you can provide professional development for the instructors. You know, even someone in an ESL program that have a master's in TESOL doesn't mean they know everything about ESOL instruction for adults. There's still things to be learned and there's new ways to approach the instruction. It could be situational. I show this giant person standing in front of a door because one of the things in the previous slide was something that I actually had happened to me as an instructor. I had a classroom that met in the evenings twice a week, and it was in a first grade classroom, but it was for adults. So the tables, the chairs, everything was super low, right? So there was kind of a ceiling, like no matter how great of an instructor I may or may not have been, you know, that situational issue was a challenge. You know, I had students that were working all day in a lot of manual labor jobs, and then they were expected to sit in a first grader chair at a first grade level desk and be comfortable enough to learn. You know, that was really a difficult thing that was hard to get over. So that's a situational issue. And there's other things that bring up the fact that we really need to do more research, right? More research is what we're talking about here. We want to put our data miners to work. Who were the data miners again? Oh yeah, the poor adult ed instructor that we had back in slide 13. So how do we utilize an instructor as a data miner? How do we have instructors have that data miner hat on, that mindset, in order for us to improve our programs? Well, a lot of times instructors will bring issues if they feel open enough, they feel like there's an empathetic atmosphere to share this. They'll bring issues to someone in a program leadership, the instructional specialist, a transition coordinator, if that's in place, maybe the program director directly. And it's very anecdotal, right? My students say that the class is too early. Okay, that is not in and of itself necessarily a measurable statement on its own. Okay, my students. Well, what does that mean? I mean, all your students, some of your students? Does it mean a student or two this session, maybe a few students last session? This is all anecdotal. Doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that you can't act upon it by itself. So my argument here is, if you're going to put your instructors to use as data miners, you've got to help them make the leap from anecdotal evidence to measurable evidence, because anecdotal evidence, acting upon that can be risky. But measurable evidence, acting upon something that's measured, is less of a risk, because now you have a concrete reason to act upon it. And no matter what level of administration or leadership you are, you can justify why you made that change. Also, don't forget, when you're asking instructors to do this, you've got to give them the tools to get the job done. Remember, instructors have limited time. Whether you are paying instructors for just teaching time, or whether you're paying them for teaching time and non-instructional time, they still have a limited amount of time to do this. And this is one more thing you're asking them to do. So if possible, provide the measurement tools for instructors when it's possible. Sometimes there are things that, the instructor can just ask the class one-on-one, make a note, and then provide it to you. But there's other times when there might be a better way to get at that information. Maybe it's something that if you have a class, especially if it's an online class, you could create a survey for the instructor. It's not that the instructor doesn't know how to or want to do the online survey, but it's something they don't have the time to spend doing, and maybe the leadership team does. And also maybe it's something that you could then replicate in other classes if you spend the time doing it in one class. So an online survey, that may be one very easy way to get at the information you want, to go from the anecdotal to the measurable. Another way would be a lesson plan. Now, what do I mean by lesson plan? If there's some issue that comes up in class that has to do with, say, I don't know, maybe it has to do with after-school activities for, your student. Or maybe, the parents say, well, I'm having trouble coming to class on time because it's in the evening, and, my child is staying late after school, and maybe they're like, I don't know why. So I'm thinking more of an ESL lesson. So the lesson plan itself might be on how parents can talk to their school's teacher or their students' teachers and find out, like, what are they doing after school? Are the students just hanging out, or is there a club that they're involved in, et cetera? So that's a way to kind of enmesh the challenge into an instructional lesson, but also then giving the instructor the tools to say, oh, okay, I heard this anecdotal evidence that our students are staying after school. They don't know why, and that's making the adults late to class. Now you've helped the learners to kind of pin down the reasons why, and then you can provide that documented evidence to the leadership team. It could also be a class visit. It could be something that's done by someone that's observing the class, instructional specialist, administrator, something maybe that might be more, career, industry focused, something a transition specialist, career counselor could do. If it's something that may take someone from the outside to come observe, maybe that's the way you want to go about it. In addition to actually getting that measurable information, make sure the communication pathway exists. If this is a class that takes place on site, so on your campus, in the correctional facility, at a literacy council, et cetera, in the library, if it happens there where the leadership team is, it could be as simple as making sure the instructor knows, hey, you can walk across the hallway, knock on my door, and give me this feedback face-to-face. That may be all that's needed. But it also may be a class that's at an off time where there aren't administrative staff available. It could be in a church basement halfway across the county. There's different ways that this could happen. So make sure that the instructors have the communication pathway, both the mechanics of it, and they feel comfortable doing that. And by that, I mean, is it appropriate for instructors to be emailing certain staff members with these kinds of issues? I hope it is. But maybe it's like, this coordinator, this AV coordinator is your direct contact person when you have issues. Make sure you email your coordinator when you have a problem, a concern, etc. And then make sure that the relationship is developed so that they feel comfortable sharing that. Maybe it's something that is on an online attendance sheet. Maybe there's a roster that the instructor fills out, and there's an etc. column for every student. And if there's some note the instructor wants to put in there, like, hey, showing up to class late, says home issues or something, just kind of a note so that whoever's looking at the attendance can be like, oh, you know what, this student's showing up late every day, but they put a reason in here. That's kind of starting that process of, okay, is this something that needs more investigation? Can I use this then to possibly make a change in my program that would help our students? In addition, make sure you go slow and pick and choose your battles. By that, I mean, you may have an instructor that notices many, many things in their classroom that they think, you know what, if we change the schedule of the class and we change the curriculum and we change the textbook and we change, the days of the week, etc., then everything will be perfect. Okay, it's not that these aren't all important things to consider, but from the administrator to the instructor, help to hone in on maybe one or two of those things to look at this time, because you can't change everything all at once. Because for one thing, you may have things in there that are good. The old expression, throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't necessarily want to change everything when maybe the curriculum was just fine, or maybe the textbook was fine, maybe the schedule was just fine. So you want to make sure that you are very specific. It would be better for you to spend your time analyzing one issue and finding out that no change is needed than to just throw changes at everything against the wall and hope that something improves for the better. Because if you do that, you don't actually know what you change that works. You've just kind of thrown a bunch of things at the problem and hope that it works. So go slow and pick and choose what you want to go after. Now, how do you get from that measurement to the intervention? Like I said before, focus on the specific targeted data that you want to collect. Provide the tools to the instructor if there's tools necessary, and then spend the time to analyze what you've learned, report out on it. And by report, it's not just report to leadership or the change maker, but report to the instructor as well. And then implement strategies. As long as the instructor or the instructor group is part of this process, it doesn't mean that they have to be involved and they have to provide feedback every step of the way. But as long as they're kept in the loop, this really helps you to get better buy-in from the instructors, especially if it's going to be a major change, like changing the time of the class, which means that the instructor would have to change the contract and have to teach at a different time, schedule change, etc. That's something you need to keep in mind. And also, some of these changes can't be implemented during a class session. That's something that would happen in a subsequent class session. If you have a group of instructors and you're thinking of changing the class schedule, maybe one of those instructors is like, you know what, if you made the class a little bit later in the day, I would volunteer to be the guinea pig for that, because that would work better for my schedule as well. So it's just, all these things could be positive if you involve everyone in the group. So rinse and repeat. So I've talked a lot about theory, so let's talk about like some concrete examples. We're going to go over one together, and then I'm going to ask you to give me some information on another one. Okay, so here's some anecdotal evidence that instructors give me. A lot of my students drop out because the class meets too early. Okay, that's useful information. The problem is, if I were the program administrator, I would not act and make a change to my program just based upon this, even if I heard this 2 or 3 or 7 times from the same instructor or from several instructors. And the reason is, changing the schedule of the class is a big deal. And you want to make sure that you don't change it to suit one student and then it makes another student not be able to join the class. So this is a perfect example of an anecdotal piece of evidence that can be very useful, but you want to make sure you're getting to that measurement. Okay, now I see Fina has raised her hand. I want to go ahead and stop a second. Do you have something you want to add or ask? I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself, but if not, you could go ahead and put it in the chat. So Fina, I'm going to go ahead and continue on, but if you get a chance to type it in, or if you're able to unmute yourself, please go ahead and feel free. So we have this example, this anecdotal example of a lot of my students drop out because the class meets too early. Okay. What tools can we use? Well, One simple tool. Oh, Fina, I see that you're going right along with what I'm talking about here. One of the tools could be a simple survey on a preferred class time. That can be done online, especially if this is a class that meets virtually. Or it could be an in-person survey. There's nothing wrong with doing things old school, as long as you're able to do it properly. In addition, maybe you want to help the instructor to embed this into the class. Doing a survey lends itself very easily to a lot of different lesson plans. For one, it's a super easy math skill to work on. So maybe in your math class, you're working on creating a simple bar graph. And so instead of just giving students a survey kind of out of the blue, it could be, today we're talking about doing simple bar graphs or doing histograms. And we're going to use the survey as a start. And maybe you use the students' data, and maybe you pull in other data too, just so it's a bigger set of numbers to pull from. And you say, okay, now we're going to create the histogram, we're going to create the bar graph around that. And you're going to talk about what does it mean if the bar is longer on students that want to start at 9 versus students that want to start at 9:30, comparisons, etc. You can talk about Likert scales, starting from what time would you prefer? Would you prefer 9 o'clock, 9:30, or 10? And then the Likert scale would be, 0 to 5, 0, I can't do it, 5, that's the perfect time. And then talk about how you do those scales. It lends itself very easily to an ESL lesson. And there's lots of things you can do there. You can do comparatives, you can do superlatives. What's the best time for everyone to meet? Is this time better than this time? You could do something like, let's pre-teach how to write your schedule. And then the next lesson would be, let's do a survey on what the best time is for your class. So sometimes you can do the measurement like that. It can be just a very quick survey, and that's fine. You don't have to make this a giant lesson. However, it can also be a learning opportunity if it makes sense for the class. And that's another example where the instructional specialist, the master teacher, et cetera, can assist the instructor in making this happen. So you get the information, right? Whether it's from the survey, whether it's from the class, et cetera. Then you want to analyze and you want to report out on it, okay? So if we do this and we see, okay, we did our survey, and maybe instead of just doing it with this one class, I did it with all 3 classes that meet 3 times a week in the morning. Well, 85% of those students say that they would prefer a 10 a.m. start time. So maybe right now we're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to 11. But I see that 85% of those students say they would prefer a 10 a.m. start time. Okay, that's good. I've gone from the anecdotal now to the measurable. So the next step is, am I going to implement it? And how do I implement it but with reducing risk? Well, you may be very hesitant as a program administrator to make that change right now in the middle of a lesson, middle of a session, I'm sorry. But if we think about the next session, maybe you say, well, I've got 3 classes that run like this, and I clearly have a lot of students that state 10 a.m. would work better. Okay, I need some time. Can I get the classroom space? Do I have an instructor that would prefer to start instead of working 9 to 11, work 10 to 12, et cetera? And then you could say, all right, next session, I'm going to have 2 of those classes run from 10 to 12, but I'm going to keep one class running from 9 to 11. And it's a way for you to slowly make those changes. And then from that point on, then analyze, did that work? The follow through, of course, is, did it work? Did you lose enrollment? Did you gain enrollment? But also the follow through is, did the instructor see that you took anecdotal evidence they gave you and then acted upon it? That's a really important thing to show instructors that you are listening, right? People in the leadership roles at programs have a lot of things working against them and working for them. You may have a college leadership above you that's focusing on enrollment games. You may have a nonprofit leadership above you that's focusing on outreach to the community, right? But the instructors have their own stakeholders, right? The instructors have the students, they have these, 8 to 10 to 12 individuals whose lives are connected to this instructor in one way or another, and they're looking to them to help them in their life goals. So this is kind of a way to say, okay, I've listened to what you said, I measured it, I have decided based on that measurement to make a change, a well-informed, data-informed change, and I followed through on it. Whether it works or not you have shown the instructor and you've shown the students that you are listening and that you're trying to make the program work for them. Hopefully, you've made this calculated risk using good data, good evidence, and you've actually gained something in the process. You have made a program that now has a schedule that suits a wider group of students than what you had before. You know, sometimes when it comes to scheduling, you might just keep the same schedule because that's what you've always done, right? But you don't know that all this time, all these years, there's been a better schedule that's worked for more students. So this is one example. It seems like I'm talking a lot, but one example of taking something that was anecdotal from a student to an instructor and then saying, okay, let's measure it, because I don't want to work just on anecdotal evidence. Let's measure it and then analyze it, report out on it, implement a change, and then follow through. Now, I want to do one now, but I want your input on it. So here's a second example. The anecdotal evidence that the instructor would bring to the program is, my adult learners have no one to watch their children during class. Okay, so I'm not asking for the solution yet. My adult learners have no one to watch your children during class. If an instructor brought this information to you, what I want you to do is think through the process of, how do I turn this anecdotal evidence into measurable data? What additional data do you need? How could you go about getting that data? And what tools could you provide your data miners, your instructors, to get at that information? So I'm not asking you for the solution. We're not talking about solution yet. I'm just talking about, how do I go from the anecdotal, my students have no one to watch your children during class, to measuring it. So what data would you need? How would you obtain it? What tools could you give your instructors to use? So I'm going to go ahead and give you a minute or two to work on that. Please think about it and put your thoughts in the chat. Okay, so you guys are giving me a lot to work with. I really appreciate this. One thing I want to point out is that some of us, and this is a really hard thing to do, some of us are jumping right to the solution. And that's natural, that's very natural. But I want to argue that it's really important to spend time on, what data do you need and how do you get that data before you go to what the solution to the problem could be. Because sometimes when you obtain the data, you find out that there really isn't an overarching problem, and therefore there's no solution needed. Okay, so some of the things that I'm seeing from the chat: how many students in the class need childcare? Great, that is a data point. How many adult learners have this issue? How many children are involved? The age of the children, time of class, what are the ages of the children? How many children need childcare? These are all great. Local care options, free and no cost, from community engagement, referrals. This is a solution. So this is jumping a little too quickly first, right? Would another time solve the problem? Okay, that could be data or solution, because the data could be asking, what time would you prefer? But also changing the class time would be a solution. All right, someone's appealing to my data mine. Update LACES data with the number of children, do formal, informal surveys with students, age of children, what community resources are available. Okay, age, gender, living status of students, so living situations, work schedules, great. You need to find out how many students had childcare needs, age of children, time of class, use LACES, great. How many students are having this issue? Other adults, people living in the home. Lesson plan about family, roles, US daycare systems to collect additional data and feelings about childcare. I love that one. That one's awesome. Do students live in the same area or near each other, school age or younger? Is a student in an in-person class or remote? Okay, these are all awesome. These are great. I just want to point out the key thing here is, make sure you're spending the time to think about, what data I need before you jump to, how do I fix this problem, okay? So I'm going to give you what my thought was on this. So the challenge is, the anecdotal evidence is, adult learners have no one to watch your children during class. Possible tools, okay? Someone mentioned something like this. If it's an ESL class, maybe you want to develop a lesson on weekly schedules. And this is one way to kind of roundabout get at, you know, this student really doesn't have someone to watch their children during class time. Tabulate the time learners have set aside to study during the week. Now, that may seem strange because this is not necessarily directly related to childcare, but it does show you, does the student have the time to dedicate to their learning needs right now? You know, sometimes students want to learn, they have the intention, they have the drive, but their life just will not allow for it in that moment. And that's not the end of the world, but it may require you as a program to find out, okay, if a 6 or 9 hour a week class can't work for the student, is there some other way I can get the student connected, but still provide for the schedule? You know, one example could be, maybe a student is getting to that point where they could be on an NEDP or GED pathway, and they've only considered GED because they're like, you know, I want to be in class, I want to learn that way, but maybe an NEDP pathway might be better for them. Just one example, you know. How do we analyze and report it? Well, maybe after we do the ESL lesson on weekly schedules, or we tabulate the time learners have set aside to study, we see that all learners have at least an hour and a half set aside to study outside of class. Okay, that's one data point. Well, what can I do with that? Well, maybe you need to think about restructuring the way your program is delivered. Maybe you want to provide online study as proxy instructional hours and reduce the face-to-face hours. I know this is something that's becoming more and more common in the adult education world, where you have class structures where there are fewer hours face-to-face, but still have those face-to-face hours, but then you have some type of a proxy hour model for the remaining hours. So instead of having 2 nights a week from 6 to 9, 6 total face-to-face hours, whether it's in person or virtual, maybe you just have 3 hours of face-to-face, and then the other 3 hours are up to the student to schedule. Now, that's not foolproof, right? You got to work with the student to make sure they're setting aside that time, but maybe you're providing them with those proxy tools so that they only have to commit to the same night as a class once a week, and the other study time can be done based on when the student has time. Maybe the student has time in the morning from 4 to 6 a.m. and that's what works best for them. Maybe the student, maybe after the kids go to bed, they finish work, maybe they can only study from 10 to midnight. But this is one way to say, okay, let's meet halfway. Let's have some in-person time, some virtual time. And from that, we'll still get our 6 hours a week of instruction. Follow through, did it work? Did it work for the students? Are you seeing more engagement in terms of the number of instructional hours the students have? Are you seeing an increase on their measurable skill gains in terms of educational functioning level? Are you seeing instructors having more engagement with their students? You know, changing the structure of the class like this also affects the instructor. And maybe the instructor might say, you know what? I feel like I'm really, when the students are in class, I'm really able to build upon what they learned on the online space and make bigger gains. Or on the flip side, maybe the instructors say, you know what, the students are not doing the online learning and I'm really losing half of my educational time. Either one of these is a possibility. And while one is clearly better than the other, the important thing is you've learned something from it, right? You've taken an anecdotal to the concrete, to data, to measurable, you acted upon it, and then you followed up to measure it, right? Monica, I appreciate you saying this. Yeah, you have to focus on the educational lead of the students. That's really important, right? So those were 2 examples of how to go from the anecdotal to the measurable. Other things to keep in mind, of course, is what are the program and instructor goals? Now, I have these graphics on the screen. You know, whether you want to use this or not doesn't necessarily matter. I just want to drive home the point that you have goals as a program, you know, usually mandated by your state, which of course are mandated by the federal government. But do you have goals for your instructor? And are those goals the same as the program goals, or are they specific to the instructor's needs or where they are in their journey, right? When you share data with instructors, one thing that I found useful in the past, and I was afraid to do it, but it'll actually end up working well, is instead of just showing the program-wide data, like the program-wide table 4, NRS table 4, I would show them, to the best of my ability, their individual table 4s. And, and some instructors looked at that and said, oh my goodness, I'm a terrible instructor. It's like, no, 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 no. Okay, I want you to understand how this works, right? The table 4 for the program is the student for the entire year. Your little table 4 is just one session, right? And so if the program goals are 50% completion, I'm not expecting that your individual class is 50% completion, right? Because you may only see that student for one session a year. But I want you to see, you know what? Of all of your students who make it to post-testing, maybe I see that 2/3 of them increase their score. Maybe not an EFL level, but increase their score. That's great, right? Because that's showing that you're having an effect upon the students. Or you make them like, you know what? I'm really seeing your students aren't making it to post-test. So we got to talk about retention. What are you doing for retention? You see, these conversations really show the instructor that you're involved, and hopefully it shows the instructor to you that they are also involved. If in the end it turns out that, you know what, I don't want to hear this as an instructor, maybe that's not the right instructor for your program. More likely than not, it's showing the instructor that, hey, I do care a lot about what goes on in your classroom, even though I can't be there every day, obviously. But I want to know, what is it that you need help with, and how can I affect change for you? Remember, program follow-through is important. A lack of follow-through means a lack of credibility. Some of our instructors, and I'll use the term seasoned, some of our seasoned instructors have been through many, many, many rounds of, let's change everything right now. And then a year later, let's go back to the way we did it before. Okay, that's the quickest way to lose credibility. From the state level, I see the same thing. There are sometimes mandates at the state level that change from one year to the next. If it's a legislative change, there's not much we can do about it. But it's because we made a poor decision or poor planning, then that is a real loss of credibility. And I think it's a fair loss of credibility. You want to make sure, as program administrators to instructors, that you're also making that same thought process. That if I'm going to put my instructors through this process of measuring how they can improve their classes, I want to make sure that I'm showing the follow-through, because without the follow-through, you've lost your credibility. And this is one way to really determine the true success or failure of a program. And remember that incremental positive changes for our students lead to long-term gains for the program. None of these things are going to show dramatic gains in your outcomes. That's just the bottom line. No matter what we do, there's always going to be things from year to year, from month to month, from day to day, from student to student, that's going to have impacts on our program. And there's many of them that we can't control. So we're talking about incremental positive change, month over month, session over session, year over year, that's going to push us in the right direction. If you've been running classes from 6 to 9 p.m. for years, and you see your levels go up and down and up and down and up and down, but all of a sudden you're like, you know what? Our students want earlier in the evening classes, and you make those changes, and over time, your data may still go up and down, but if in general it's going in that positive direction, this is that long-term incremental positive change that we really want to see in the programs. Remember, instructors are not superheroes, or are they? They're part-time. Almost, 100% instructors are part-time adjunct faculty. They have limited or they have no planning time. So even if you're a program that's able to pay your instructors for their non-instructional planning time, it's still a lot for instructors. And this is one more thing to ask of them. So consider what else you can do to provide to your instructors to incentivize them. I don't necessarily mean money. Now, I don't know if any instructor is going to turn down extra money, but also think about, how can you use things like this to incentivize instructors to build up their career, help instructors, support them in doing presentations at something like the Virtual Training Institute. This is a way to kind of groom people to determine, what, when I have a leadership position open in my program, this instructor really ran with this whole, anecdotal to measurable data thing. And we've really seen some improvements in their part of the program. I think this is someone I want to pull into my leadership team, whether it's a part-time or full-time basis, right? So keep all of that in mind with your instructors. Some other thoughts, I alluded to this earlier, but, think about, is there a way to develop a local table 2 for instructors? When I did this, I kept things in the table 2 format that I provided to the instructors for the program. But what I did is we had to manually calculate an individual instructor's table 4. And the way we did that is we basically looked at the number of students in their class and based on NRS guidelines, you know, how many hit 12 hours, that was our denominator, and then how many made a level gain, how many, you know, increased their score, et cetera, and then did the data from that. It was a little time consuming, and I argue probably there could be a way to automate some of that. If you're in Maryland, it's not something that LACES can do for you easily, because LACES looks at the student outcome. And if you just pull in every student that an instructor has touched in their class, you know, touched upon them educationally, you're going to get both the benefits and the bad parts of other classes that that student has been in that may not have been tied to that instructor. So it's very difficult to use LACES for that. That's something that's better done maybe on a class by class basis. And maybe it's something where at the end of each class session, you have in the spreadsheet a way to calculate certain metrics. And then over the course of a year, you have the instructors look at, hey, you know what, your fall classes had really good retention, but your spring classes had really good, you know, EFL gains, for example. So think about how you can do that and what makes sense both for the amount of manpower you have in your program and what you can have your instructors look at. Listen to the needs of the instructors. I'm always very pro instructor. Even though I was only an instructor for 3 years, I just know that your programs live or die on the back of the instructors. So you want to make sure that they are supported and that you're listening to them. Make your MSGs and the outcomes part of the instructor evaluation, but make sure it's not the totality of it. I've had really good instructors that have had terrible, terrible months. And it doesn't mean that they were ineffective. It just means that something else was going on that resulted in them not having good outcomes. So make sure that you don't just focus on the measurable skill gains as a way to measure instructors. Think long-term. You know, better data in the short term can result in better planning for new classes, especially when we get to more complicated issues such as integrated education and training, integrated English literacy and civics education, et cetera. Some instructors absolutely love data. If they love data, use that to your advantage, especially if you don't like data. And never, ever, 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 should have put more evers in there, be afraid of data, okay? I will be 100% honest on where Maryland's data is right now. If you want to talk about it, there is no reason to run from it, because in the end, it's going to become well-known, right? You know, state data is public data whenever it gets through Octave and Octave processes it. Local data is public at least to the state level. So, you know, don't run from it. Learn from it, okay? Don't hide what you're doing. Be honest with what is and what is not working in your program, and then learn from it. Okay, so that is all I have about data mining with instructors. We do have a few minutes left, which is great. I was hoping that we'd have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to either raise your hand and I'll let you unmute yourself, or if you want to type something in the chat box, please feel free. If you want to ask me a question afterwards, my email address, if you don't have it already, is up on there. It's douglas.weimer@maryland.gov. Please feel free to email me. Also, this will be recorded. I know Gina will, at some point in the future, have all of these sessions archived so they can be watched at a later time. And if you don't have any questions, I really appreciate you taking the time with me and listening, and hopefully we learned something today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Really appreciate all that information. So I am going to drop the feedback survey in the chat and also the proof of participation. Again, we just ask that you fill out the proof of participation only once, and we will try and get this process as soon as possible. And Gina is going to work on getting the presentations uploaded to our website, which is right here. I'm dropping that also in the chat box, our VTI webpage. So you can go there and you can certainly review this whenever you need to. There's a lot of information, but that's great. There's a lot of useful information for you. Unfortunately, participants don't have the ability to unmute themselves. So if you have a question, if you could please put it in the chat box, that would be great. I know that some questions can be a long and cumbersome, but unfortunately that's the way that Zoom was set up for this institute.
So Susan Shoemaker, I see you have your hand up. I didn't know if you had a question. Oh, there it is. The question about new cost of schools test questions and how I can find out how if the questions flesh out incremental learning increases. So I don't have the answer to that, unfortunately. I probably would have to loop in Helen Coop on that one, because I'll be honest, I've never given the cost of schools series test myself, and I don't know enough about it to answer that question. So I'm going to make a note on that and see if I can possibly get an answer from Helen on that one for you. So I apologize, I can't answer it myself. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. I hope that I gave you some ideas. And if you have any other ideas that you want to bounce off me, please feel free to reach out. I'd rather you ask me and say, Doug, I don't know if this will make sense, but I just want to bounce the idea off someone. Please let me know. Lori said, love to figure out some end of year report, share with the instructors, maybe connect later. Yeah, Lori, I'd like that to talk about that too, because I don't necessarily have a format that necessarily everyone can use, but I do have some ideas. So I'd love to have another conversation later about maybe what makes sense and what is sustainable as far as, you know, local programs actually creating these reports without having to do a ton of hand calculations. So yes, I'd love to talk about that another time.
Okay, well, again, thank you, Doug. I want to thank you for this presentation, and thank you all for participating and just for being present. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Thank you.